Okay, cool. All right. And it's okay. I could think the intro is not that too important, but yeah, so the WPA is a writing placement test, and you can take it once you reach 60 units. This can mean that let's say you have 45 units now, and by the end of the semester, you'll have 60, or you could already have 60 or above. And that means you're required to take it. And the writing placement test isn't, I mean, it's called writing, but it tests a lot more than that. It also tests your reading and critical thinking skills or analysis skills. That's really what the test is going to be focused on here, because writing is like kind of just one piece of what they're looking for. They're also looking for your understanding, your reading comprehension as well. So as I said earlier, this test, at least in my opinion, I think it's a lot easier than the AP language exam. If you look here, the AP language exam is like 3 hours and 15 minutes. And you have to write 3 different essays as well. You have to do like, based off like what I can remember, you have to write like a rhetorical one, a synthesis, and an argumentative. Plus you have to do multiple choice questions. But fortunately for this test, it's all writing. All of it is writing. So it's just 2 hours and you write one rhetorical essay. There are no multiple choice questions. So what you'll be doing is that you'll be writing a rhetorical analysis essay on an argumentative article. So they give you an article that has a certain position on something. It could be like, oh, a law that LA released about zoos, or at least the one that I got, it was about something about it was about a certain law being put in place, like certain legislation that was about how college athletes are able to make money based off of their appearances, like photos and certain merchandise made off of them, and like other things like that. But even though you're given an argument, your goal is to not side with the argument or argue against the argument, because the emphasis here is on rhetorical. What we're going to be doing here is that once we just read this argumentative essay, this opinion piece, this I forgot the word for it. This you will be reading this. Oh yeah, editorial. So you'll basically be reading this editorial, and you'll be analyzing its argument. So what you have to do is just follow the prompts. And generally speaking, people when they finish the test, they usually type up about 500, 700 words analyzing this argument. But I'd say that at least in my position, I don't think 500 or 700 is like enough. I usually write a little over 700, but that's just me. I'm kind of a wordy person. But it's different for everyone. But I'd say that like 500, 700 is like a pretty good ballpark figure that you could apply yourself to. So if you get yourself in that range, you should be good to go. So what is the prompt exactly? I want you to pay attention to what we have here in bold, because these are like the big four things that this test will be focusing on. So identify 2 persuasive strategies that the author uses to support his or her argument, and analyze how these strategies might persuade the reader to support the claim. Discuss the assumptions on which the argument is based, and evaluate the extent to which the reader will find the argument convincing. So really, in order to get a good score on the exam, on the essay, is just follow the prompt to the T, because that's really just what they're looking for. And they don't really want any extra fluff. Like there isn't really any, they're not kind of looking around for anything else. They're just basically just sticking themselves directly to this prompt, and they're looking for what you see here. They want you to identify 2, just 2, you don't have to do 3. And the third body paragraph, that is usually where you put your assumption, and you could just, I don't know, just like explain your reasons for each one, really. And you also have to, and
Shoot,
other
shoot.
thing, I mean, there's, oh, sorry, Grace, did you say something?
Oh, thank you. Kind of, sort of, not really.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, did you have a question? Okay, cool. All right. What was I saying? So really, you just have to be focusing on really these 4 things, really, just 2 persuasive strategies, 1 assumption. And once you have those down, you can just lay out your reasons for how it affects the reader, or how well the author does it, or well, how this affects the audience. I would say though that even though the raters of the essays are sticking to this prompt, the prompt itself kind of leaves things out that you really have to pay attention to. Like you have to know about your audience. You have to know about, okay, what are some things the author isn't considering? And these aren't really something, these aren't really things that are covered in this prompt that are crucial to getting a good score, which I think is a little bit disappointing that they don't. Oh, I got a question. Okay, where could I find the recording? I have class now. Let's see. I'm gonna be having this recording saved to my computer. So what I think I could be doing is like I could talk with the other officers and have this recording like available via the Instagram. Like we have like a link in their story. I don't know if you follow them or not, but I'll have this recording on hand for my like, and it would be able I could able to have it spread by like other the officers through social media. Maybe it could be put on Blackboard, I think. But yeah, I'll definitely let them know about it. But if you have to go for class, that's completely fine. No worries. I'll have this all recorded. All right. And let's focus on the next thing. So, what to look for? So, one of the biggest things that I was like worried about regarding the WPA was, oh, I don't know my rhetorical devices. I'm like, oh, wait, like what is an apophora? What's an alliteration? I mean, I know what alliteration is, but it's I would got really confused because I didn't really know all of these rhetorical devices terms. And I remember looking at like a list like of this, and it had all these terms I haven't even heard of. But really, you don't really have to know all of these terms to get a good score. Like for me, when I took the test, I talked about imagery and I talked about their use of statistics and citations. But you don't really, yeah, so like really you don't need to know like a whole glossary of terms. If you want to explore them on your own time, that's perfectly fine and it could help you in the long run. But what you need to do is know what you're looking for so you could form the two body paragraphs, which are pretty big. They're like the foundation of your essay. And you could do that by looking for certain things like syntax. Syntax is the form of structure of the sentences. So are these sentences super long, or are they super short, and what effect do they have? You can also look at diction. So like, okay, are they using like really complicated erudite jargon? Are they using really informal phrases and words? And if so, what effect does that have? Why does the author use them? And what effect does this have on the audience? The tone. Tone is pretty easy. Like how is the author feeling? Like, are they really upset? Like, it was kind of funny because like when I was taking the WPA, like the author was saying things like, really now? And like, are you kidding me? And like they were making their tone pretty clear. So you could talk about that and obviously citations because that also fits into how they're going to be arguing their points. And a lot of authors tend to use statistics. They like to quote people. They like to throw numbers at your reader. And these all have like different effects depending on what they're talking about. So really, you don't have to, at the bottom line, if you don't know a glossary of rhetorical terms, that's fine. If you don't know it, I mean, I'm a microbiology major. I'm not specializing in English at all. And I was able to get by without them. Knowing like some basic ones that you're able to talk about is probably what I would recommend. And based off that, knowing what to pay attention to, which is syntax, diction, tone, citations, those things are what you should be looking for next. And oh gosh, okay, so back when I was a freshman, one of the RAs held an event about this too. And like I had to admit it was not a good presentation at all. Like the girl walked up to like a board, drew like like a triangle and said like, let's talk about pathos, ethos, logos. And I'm like, no, 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 we're not in high school. Let's not talk about this again. Why I say it's like it's a trap because it does not show everything. Doesn't show everything, but it's like it makes you have this way of thinking that you have to look for something when you don't. Like, okay, I have to look into the writing. I need to find what's the pathos part, what's the ethos part, what's the logos part. But like, you don't have to do that, especially when this type of exam, it's not looking for all three of these parts of a triangle anyway. We have to look back at the prompt. So the prompt says two persuasive strategies and one assumption. So we're not really looking for how they're going to be using pathos, ethos, logos. We're looking for, okay, what are their rhetorical devices and what is their assumption? If you fall into like this trap, you're going to be getting so worked up over trying to look for something that isn't going to be there. Like, let's say there's some authors that don't use that good logos, or like there's some that don't have any pathos at all. Like, it sounds kind of dry, but like, yeah, they don't really use pathos. So it's too general to be looking for things like this, and it also limits your thinking. What's better is that you pick something specific that you can analyze. For example, like on one essay I wrote on the samples, it was about elephants. And I talked about how the author uses imagery. I talked about how the author characterizes these elephants as such gentle creatures, and you could see them like just milling around in savannah, just hanging out, just living their elephant lives. And that's something specific, that's imagery. And you could see how does that affect the audience? Well, the audience now has like a more close connection with the elephants. They could feel like they're people. And the audience itself, they may not live in Africa, they may not live close to elephants, but hey, seeing how the author characterizes these elephants, it makes it more persuasive because now they feel like they have a human connection with them. Any questions so far? All right, let's go on to the next one. So I talked about this a little bit earlier about identifying the audience, and that's super important because this is how you study the effect. So let me try to exit out of this right here because I wanted to show like my own essay that would probably be helpful. So in this essay, I did sample, let's see, what sample did I do? Sample one. So no more current calls for elephants. They are majestic animals, not performers. The city council should act to protect them. Identify the audience as a Southern Californian audience. And this is crucial because, I mean, I should have like explained it a little bit more here, but this is crucial in order to state because this is how you analyze the effects. So obviously the audience is in Southern California. Elephants don't live in Southern California. So we have to, the author would have to do some sort of use some sort of rhetorical devices in order to get this audience, which is already so far away from Africa, to get them to have this connection with the elephant so that their point could get understood. And it also shows like if you're able to name the audience, also shows what the audience's realm of knowledge is, so that because that also affects how the author would write about their subject. So as we stated earlier, obviously people from LA, they're not going to like know anything about elephants. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's pretty safe to assume. So, and also another thing in addition to, since LA is such a huge, diverse place with people having like, you know, differing levels of knowledge about animals and elephants in general, the author is going to have to write in a certain way that reaches to his or her audience so that everyone could understand. They'd have to write in layman's terms. So that could affect the diction and how the sentences are structured. So knowing how the audience is, being able to understand what their realm of knowledge is, what they're familiar with the topic is, where they're coming from and who they are, it would help you write how the effects of their devices are. It'll help you see how the author kind of forms this interaction with them, because really that's what this article is. This article is a form of interacting with the audience in a way. And another thing is that you should also identify what the author is not considering. And that's something that I think the pathos, ethos, logos triangle thingy really misses out on, because that focuses so much on what the author is doing, but not what the author is not doing. And that's, I think, what makes it a little bit intimidating for some people, because they think that, oh, I have to think a little bit differently than what the AP Lang, so it's going to be hard. But really, it's just like considering something that they usually would not test you on. So I'd say you could use this you could use this to your own advantage in a way to talk about the assumptions the author is making. So like, okay, what is the author not considering? I'm going to go back to my own essay. And we read about in this sample, it's all about, okay, the LA Council is making a certain measure to prevent elephants from performing and traveling shows and exhibitions. And the author is like, yeah, this is a good measure. We have to protect the elephants, blah, blah, blah. But this isn't everything regarding like elephant protection, right? I know it sounds kind of silly, but something I talked about as like an assumption down here was that, well, the author is kind of doing this in an interesting way. It's like he's talking about this measure being proposed by the LA City Council as if it's like the whole thing regarding elephants. Like, okay, elephants are going to be affected by this measure, yeah, but like this is all that he's focusing on, really. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you could help protect the elephants. The way I kind of said it, it sounds kind of silly, but you could just like bring the elephants back home, like take them back home to the savannah. Like you're saying that it's just stopping there at like the legal process of like preventing them from being in like a circus or something, but like it doesn't say anything about giving them a home, about returning elephants to their native environment where they'd be a lot more happy. And after all, I mean, I talked about this earlier, it's like the author talks about so much describing the elephant's habitat, about how they're so much in peace, how they're just being able to eat and sleep and spend time with family in the savannah. But I think it's so kind of ironic because they spend all that time describing the savannah and their home, and then they're like, okay, let's just stop at like this policy. Just let's just keep talking about that policy. We don't have to return them though, because it's just they're gonna stay in LA. And it's like, that's something that the author could have shed some light on a little bit more. That would have made their argument a little bit stronger, in my opinion. And you know what? It's like when it comes to identify what the author is not considering, this is like a little bit, I have to say, it's kind of a little bit of your own opinion as well. I hate to say it, but like as much as objective this test wants you to be, when you're having to identify an assumption of it, in a way, it's kind of like have you play with the author's perspective in your own hands. Like, okay, like kind of look at it yourself and like, what is this? What do I think is like they're not doing right? What is like something that I think they could work on? And you could possibly also use that to your own advantage as well, because, okay, so how are they setting up the situation, for example? I'd say like a better example of a type of essay that I could talk about was the one that I took back in earlier in April. I took it on April 2nd online. And for that essay, it was talking about how that I think LA was going to make athletes be able to make money off of media appearances, off of merchandise, and basically get paid just like any other worker would. And the author had made it interesting. So he set it up so that people who opposed this policy were kind of like the bad guys. Like he said things like, oh, these people don't know what they're doing. They're money hungry millionaires. They're just whining about losing a couple dollars. And then he characterized the people who were in favor of this policy as the good guys, as like these guys are doing what athletes have been wanting for decades. This is what they deserve. They need to make that money. They're students. They're probably broke. And I think that's interesting because like by framing it this way, at least what I considered for the assumption, I'd say something the author is not considering is that, I mean, I hate to play devil's advocate here, but like the people who are opposing the policy, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not working in the athlete's best interest. Like I talked about in that essay about how in this article, in order for the rhetorical devices to come together well, the author has to make this assumption that the people who oppose the policy are not in the are not who are not acting in the athlete's interest. He assumes from the get-go that these guys just hate athletes and just are money hungry monsters. And even though I hate to say it, like I agreed with like the author wholeheartedly. Like, yeah, I think athletes should definitely be paid. And that's what I was thinking in my head. And it kind of hurt having to write that too, because like I didn't want to have to write and defend the rich people, right? Like they're not doing anything for me. For the scope of the essay, though, this is what I needed to consider because this is what the author was not considering. Why was the author characterizing these guys as the bad guys right from the start? Why was he not like humanizing their side of the argument a little bit more? Because honestly, he could have done a little bit of a better job trying to bring his opponent's best argument forward, because if he didn't, it kind of loses credibility. Like, oh, of course you're going to make them look dumb for your article. Like that's what most people do. So overall, it's really important to consider what the author is not considering. And yeah, and in effect, it kind of hurts having to go against what you own believe in, especially when you try to when you're arguing against, especially when you agree with the author at what I'm saying. That could be kind of hard to do. But that's something that you have to do necessary to this article, to this essay, is that you might have to, even if regardless if you agree with the author or not, you have to go out of your way and find their weak points and exploit it for this essay. Another one is like try to consider how all the elements work together. So these are, I'd say these are some pretty good questions you could ask yourself as you're analyzing the essay. So do the devices depend on the assumption? Like what I said earlier, kind of like when I mentioned with the WPA essay I wrote back in early April. I was like, okay, so in order for these rhetorical devices about the tone, about these statistics, in order for these to work together well for that essay about athletics, it has to be on the assumption that the people who oppose the policy are not working in the athletes' best interests, and they're not, and they're selfish and they only have their own interests in mind. Or another one you could have is like, how do the rhetorical devices work together? Like, okay, so looking back on that same essay about athletics, the author throws a bunch of statistics at you and also uses a really incredulous tone. Like he says things like, really, are you kidding me? And I think that tone just further intensifies the strength of those statistics already, because the statistics name like millions of dollars being spent in lobbying, millions of dollars being made off of generating profit from athletes' merchandise, which they don't get a cent of. So you can also consider the interplay between them as well. And the third one, how may the assumption hurt the argument? So another one would probably be like, I'd say again, the athlete essay was like a lot better for showcasing how these work together. I mean, that elephant essay is like, I mean, it's about the same rigor that you'd see on this test itself, but I don't really think it's like representative of like all things I could be talking about. So going back to the athlete essay, how may the assumption hurt the argument? So I'd say that when it comes to the author's characterization of his opponents, the reason why that might hurt the argument is because people might think that he's biased from the start. Like he's just showing off his bias at the beginning of the article. Like he was like roasting them right from the start. So some people might not like that. I mean, I thought it was fine. I like roasting rich people, but like, yeah, so some people don't like that and would think, hey, this guy's just kind of making them look stupid. He's not giving them a fair fight, and he's not really showing the best argument that they could have made in defense of themselves. And by the way, he also characterizes them as money hungry monsters. Well, I don't think that. They're people too. So being able to, they have to also understand that when they're making these arguments, they're saying it to like a general populace that's like, again, very diverse and has a lot of different points of view. And because of that, they needed to, I mean, I hate to say it, but they also have to make their argument in a certain way that also pleases everyone as well. So if you notice how they say things like some pretty like colorful language and express themselves in a pretty like vibrant way about their opponents in a way that's very aggressive and very inflammatory, well then that could work in your favor for like two things. You could use that for rhetorical devices, like if they're using really inflammatory language, you could talk about their tone and their diction, but you could also use that for talking about their assumption as well. So like for the athletics article, you could talk about how, well, unfortunately, I know I can understand how passionate the author is about the subject, but the fact that he's being so inflammatory and name calling would probably hurt his the credibility of his article, because he's assuming that his opponents are just bad from the start. We reached halfway through. Are there any questions so far? All right, let's move on. So keep the intro short. I'd say like another big like misconception that I've seen people make, at least based on like my other writing courses, like in high school and stuff, is that they spend a little bit too long on the intro. And I'd say like, yeah, I can understand that's like a mistake, because, you introduce the topic, what you're talking about in the intro, right? Well, that's the thing, is that's not really the meat of like what you're doing it. Because like if you were to imagine your essay, I mean, it sounds kind of childish, but like if you were to imagine your essay like a big sandwich, your intro is not like the meat, the lettuce, tomato inside of it. It's the bread. Just like your conclusion, that's like the bread. Like intro is the bread on the beginning, conclusion's the bread at the bottom. You don't want to spend too much time on it because you only have 2 hours. And you need to also have some time to like take in what you're reading. So for me, for my intro, like I'll show you how short mine was. Like for this essay that I used for my WPA practice, my intro is only 2 sentences. The 2012 Los Angeles Times article, "No More Curtain Calls for Elephants," describes a policy considered by the city council that bans the use of elephants in outside entertainment, period. That's 1 sentence. The author employs a variety of literary techniques to convince their Southern Californian audience of the necessity of this policy, relying on colorful diction and citations to fortify their argument, period. That's only 2 sentences. That's all you need. The first sentence ideally should just introduce, like, it's a pretty simple pattern you could follow, is that you could just say the, and then the year it was published. So it's 2012, the name of the publisher, Los Angeles Times, and the name of the article. So like, and that's like a really good way. Like once you have that written out, you introduced it just fine. That's really all you need to do. And they don't always have the author's name written here. So like if they had their name, which I most likely they wouldn't, I'd probably say like, oh, so and so's article, 2012 article, blah blah blah. Then yeah, I'd write that. But really, you could just, if your first sentence, I'd say like following this model is completely fine. That's what I did on my WPA essay. I just did it like that too. And the second part should kind of like just give like an overview of like what rhetorical devices you caught on. So like, okay, I found diction and citations. Like I think that's pretty cool. And once you have those down, like you're pretty much good to keep on going because again, you only have 2 hours. And like, I don't know about you, but sometimes time kind of flies when I'm writing. So just having like 2 to 3 good sentences is like your ideal intro paragraph. And then just jump straight into the first body paragraph because that's really like the meat of your sandwich. That's the lettuce, tomato, mayo, whatever. That's really the thing that you should be focusing on anyway. So another thing that I like to do is that I mean, this is something I kind of discovered on accident, was that I found that I tried making my practice runs a little bit harder. Well, for me, granted, I only did one practice run, but I initially thought that the WPA was only an hour and a half and it's actually 2 hours. So making it kind of harder for yourself is another thing that would be a little bit more beneficial in the long run, because sure, you might, the test itself isn't going to be an hour and a half, it's going to be 2 hours, but putting that extra pressure on yourself will make it a lot easier for yourself by the time you take the test. Another thing that you should try doing is that you could try handwriting it instead of typing, because I mean, lucky me, I got to type it all online. And I think another thing that, so I didn't really have to like have my fingers and my wrist like cramp up while I'm writing the essay. And another thing is that when I'm writing, at least for me, this is what I personally do, is that I always reread aloud because it helps me make it sound good. But the thing is, for me, in my case, I was taking this online and it was also recorded. So like what I had to do is like I had to I mean, I hopefully y'all would be in person by the fall, but if you're not, unfortunately, you'd have to take it online. And like what I had to do was like kind of film my whole surroundings. I had to make sure that I had to like take down some things. So like I mean, I had to like erase my whiteboard because I didn't want to make them think that I was cheating on it if I was looking at it. And I had just recorded my surroundings. And after that, I started writing. And because they're recording you, the camera's on the whole time, I couldn't read it aloud. And that really hampered my writing in a way because like it made it a little harder for me. So in my practice runs, I made sure that I wasn't reading my sentences aloud. So if you have any like crutches that you would do like reading things aloud, or or maybe you would then do the practice run typing it, try to make it harder for yourself by handwriting it instead. Kind of like what we did in AP Lang. Like in AP Lang, yeah, there was really no, unless you got like testing accommodations, I guess. I think it's completely handwritten. But yeah, just making it harder for yourself will just make it easier in the long run. For the second bullet point, I never really done this before, like try picking a dense article, but maybe that's just something that might work for some people. The articles that you're given generally aren't too difficult to read. Like it's something about pretty straightforward, like, okay, the elephants need this policy, the athletes need to be paid, blah, blah, blah. Like it's usually not too rigorous in terms of like reading comprehension wise. And also make use of SESU services. So like the writing center was like pretty helpful because, okay, back last year, actually no, not last year, 2 years ago, before the pandemic started, I was going to be taking my WPA test, but unfortunately I had to go home because like I think it was on, my test was on March 14th, and that's when SCSU sent everybody home. So I just got refunded. But something that's great about the writing center is that you're able to go to them. You could like take a practice test. You could go to these samples online, write your own, go do take your own practice run of the test, go to them, and they'll look over it and they'll help like clear some things up. Like, oh, they'll tell you, oh, this was a little bit too wordy, or I don't think your point was too clear here, or like, oh, I think you could have stated this in less words. And they can give you like a bunch of like critique about improving your writing. But I would say though, the one big caveat, which is understandable, is that they can't tell you what score they could give you. Like when I went to them, I was like, hey, do you know if this is gonna be a 10 or not? I want to know if it's a 10. And I'm like, and they're like, I'm sorry, but we can't tell you because these are reviewed by like multiple people, like pretty experienced, like people in rhetoric and writing studies type of things. So they can't really give you that type of insight, unfortunately, because honestly, a lot of them are also students just like you. They could be another student who happens to be majoring in English, is working at the writing center. So they might not be able to give you a good estimate of like what score you'd get, but it's still regardless, it's still pretty helpful to help get that critique of how to write a little bit more smoothly and better because it'll help you in the long run. Another thing is that do not forget to get testing accommodations, especially if you have some of a learning disorder or you have any other trouble with writing. Make use of the Student Ability Success Center so you could get the testing accommodations you could need. Because you could get, if you need test time extensions, you could get it. And it would be pretty horrible to take the WPA and get a low score because you did not get those type of accommodations. So make sure that you have yourself registered with them, make sure that you're familiarized with them, and it will help you with those accommodations for any ability needs that come in your way. Another thing is like reread what you write. And I really, for me, I was really upset because looking back on like the days where I had to write essays, like when I was taking the SAT essay portion, or like when I was taking AP language, AP Lang, and like my senior year of high school, they kept on talking about rereading, like what the, oh, I got some, did they not tell you not to read? Oh, okay, right. Okay, um, honestly, let's see, when I took the exam, at least when I took, okay, I can only speak from my own experience because I took it reading online, right? So the reason why I didn't read it out loud was because I didn't read it out loud because I thought they would be cheating. They thought I would be cheating because even though I recorded, I put my laptop on my lap and like spun around in my swivel chair and like showed everything. Um, I don't really know what constitutes as cheating for them. I mean, I guess I have like a more liberal idea of it than they do, or like, I don't know. So the reason why I didn't read it out loud is because I didn't want them to think I'm sus or something. I don't want them to think that I'm like recording like what I'm saying on like a separate device or something and like sharing the information because, obviously that's not allowed. So yeah, thanks for asking that question. So like, yeah, as much as like I love reading what I write out loud like multiple times, like I would start at the beginning of the paragraph and work my way down to like where I started writing. That really helps me to make it sound smooth because like if it doesn't sound smooth, to me at least, if it doesn't sound smooth when I'm saying it, it's probably not going to sound smooth when I'm reading it. So that's what I like to do. But obviously when you take this test in real life, I think you will be taking it in like with multiple people, like it's your typical testing hall, basically like AP Lang. So like obviously you have to stay quiet, which sucks because I love talking and reading things aloud. But yeah, unfortunately you'd have to like kind of sacrifice that for the test. All right, going back to like what I was talking about in number 9. So rereading what you write is really crucial because like as I said earlier, it helps to show that your ideas are flowing smoothly. And it can also help you identify where you could put like a good transition because being able to read what you write actually it's really help it's like I'd say it's a lot more helpful than like rereading the article because when I took the test I read the article about maybe like 2 times and I would like kind of I guess skim for like certain parts but I wouldn't read it. I read it completely through twice completely, but I read what I wrote, like hundreds of times, like over and over again. Like I had like I had like a good spare amount of time, but I was still spending the time reading it over and over again to make sure that it's not too wordy, that I'm covering all the parts of the prompt, and so on. So being able to reread what you write is honestly, I'd say, more important than rereading the article multiple times, because this is what you're going to be sending in. They're not going to be rereading the article. They're going to be rereading what you wrote, and they're going to be talking about that with like other graders and whatnot. So making what you wrote good, making it smooth, making it making it appropriate with the prompt is just what's really crucial for the exam. And the last one is just try your best to relax. I know it sounds kind of obvious for me to say that, and it's not really helpful, but making sure that you take care of yourself before the exam is what really helps you get this good score to begin with. Like if you're too tired, well, you might misinterpret the prompt. If you're hungry or thirsty, if I'm hungry and thirsty, I'm gonna be thinking about my next meal. I'm not gonna be thinking about writing. And I'd say that, okay, for the last one, I think if you took honors 100, they might have covered this with you, mindfulness exercises. So like having that growth mindset, like they talk about, like saying I can, having like your own little mantra is like good too. Because at the end of the day, it's like whether or not you get a 10 or 8 or a 6 or whatever, you're still great. Like it's this test doesn't define you. It doesn't define your writing skills. It doesn't define your reading skills. And honestly, like it's it's kind of another way for like the school to make money off you. And I hate saying that, but like if I would be lying to say that if I were not saying that, I'd be lying by omission if I were to say that the school isn't trying to make money off you this test. Because like I got a sister at UC Santa Barbara, and they do not have to take the WPA. I don't know why Cal State's students have to do it, but like UC kids, they don't have to do it. I'm not really sure why, but yeah. So unfortunately, we have to take this test, and like yeah, there are some bad rumors around it, and it could be a pain, especially given how like some schools don't offer APs to help prep for this exam, and some schools really aren't good at teaching writing in general. But I'd say that at the end of the day, whether if you get a good score or not, you could take it again if you want, or you could take the classes. You'd still get, like, I'd say, a help. You'd still get that help that you need, whatever your writing ability is. Like, even though I thought like I was kind of okay in my writing skills, when I went over with my essay with Grace, it helped me figure out like, okay, these are my weak points, and I should be cognizant of that. And I could carry with that with me even outside of the testing center. And hey, maybe if you get 6 or something, hey, you at least get to like take these extra classes, and like sure, they might cost a little bit more, but in the long run, writing is still an important skill. And there might be some unintended benefits that come across with it. Like I've heard some people have really great experiences of being in these classes and getting to know other students and getting to know the professor really well, and like really being able to fall in love back in writing again with the other classes they may take. So if you get a 10, that's great. Keep going. If you don't get a 10, like an 8 or 6, that's perfectly fine. There's always another, if you want to take it again, that's okay. Or you could take another class that fulfills the credit. At least that's effective for spring of 2021. You're able to do that. But yeah, it isn't something to stress about in the end. It is a requirement to graduate, but it's not going to like negatively impact you in any way if you like don't get the score that you want. And overall, it doesn't really define you or your writing skills anyway, because really no test can do that. It's such just a really abstract concept that can never really be measured just by a number alone. So this brings me to the end of the presentation. I could like go over some of what I've written for my own essay if you want, because we do have some extra time. But I'll leave the floor open for any questions that you might have about it. Any other Grace could also answer some if she wants. Like I don't want to bug you because I know I'm running this event, but like yeah, if you have any other questions, like feel free to let me know. Otherwise, if you want, you're free to go if you have any classes or something like that. Oh yeah, and what was it? Yeah, I'll make sure to talk to the other officers about the recording. Let's see. Any last minute prep tips? Let's see, last minute prep tips. Okay, it's gonna be a little hard question for me to answer, because like honestly, when I took it, I didn't really have any last minute prep things. I was kind of lazy. I was like, okay, Grace told me I did good on this one. I think I'm good. But I guess for like some things I could say off the top of my head are just like kind of like these last ones right here. Like it could be it's just so easy to get yourself like worked up about it because yeah, it is a test. Like test, and especially if you have really bad test anxiety, it's something that could really consume what you're thinking about. But being able to just take care of yourself is like I'd say is the biggest thing at the end of the day. Make sure you get good sleep, good food and water, and if you want, try to do some mindfulness exercises. It's a little bit corny, in my opinion. Like not everyone can meditate. Meditation's like really hard, honestly. I'd say another good last minute prep tip is that you could try to distract yourself with other things. Like maybe you could go make something fun. Like you can make like a snack or go out on a walk or something. It doesn't really have to be anything super complicated, just something that would just get your mind off the exam. Because ironically, no, the more you think about it, the more you'll get nervous about it. So in your best interest, sometimes taking a break from thinking about the WPA will help you better. So that's all I could say for last minute prep tips, Riley. Thanks for asking. Are there any questions so far about the WPA or prep or um okay, so it seems like I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. So thank you for everyone who came to show up. I'm going to be able, again, as I said earlier, I'm going to have the recording on hand. So I'll be able to share it with my other officers as well. Thanks for coming. And if you have any other questions, like, yeah, you could email Grace. You put her email in the chat and have a good day. If you have more class to go to, I hope it gets better. It's just so, I'm tired of school already. So honestly, I'm just done. I'm tired of taking tests in general. But hey, at least I could help you with the WPA. That's probably like that's something that was it. That is something that's like at least something good to take away from it, you know? Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming. All right, I'm gonna end the recording.